You've been kind your whole life. And somewhere along the way, you decided that was your identity. You smiled when you didn't want to, said yes when everything in your body was screaming no, stayed in rooms where you weren't valued, did favors for people who wouldn't return them, kept quiet when you had every right to speak. And you called all of that being a good person. But what if it wasn't goodness? What if it was fear? Wearing the costume of kindness, let that land, because this isn't a lecture. This is an invitation to see yourself clearly. And when you see clearly, nothing stays the same. Think about the last time someone asked you for something you didn't want to give. Something that cost you your time, your energy, your peace. And what did you do? You said yes, before you checked in with yourself, before you questioned it. And later, that familiar heaviness settled in. Why do I always do this? You tell yourself it's because you care, but that answer might be the most convincing lie you've ever told yourself. There's someone like you. Let's call her Sarah. Everyone loved Sarah, always helpful, always available, never asking for anything. And every night, she went home drained. Not from the work, from the performance. But she didn't see it as performance. She thought it was love. You didn't choose this. You learned it. As a child, you had one job: stay loved. So your nervous system adapted. You became easy, agreeable, safe. Because somewhere deep inside, you learned, if I stop being easy, I lose the love. So now you never stop. You say yes, you adjust, you shrink. You call it kindness, but it's survival. And people take it. Not always because they're bad, but because you taught them. You showed them your limits don't exist. And now you live inside that version of yourself. And quietly, you resent it. That resentment? It's not weakness. It's truth. It's the part of you saying, this isn't okay. There's a loneliness in this. Not being alone, but being surrounded and still invisible. Because people don't know you, they know the version of you that's easy to love, not the real you. That's why it never feels enough, because they're loving a performance, not you. Over time, you stop knowing what you want. What do you want? I don't mind. Silence. You became a mirror and forgot you had a face. But this pattern protected you. It worked. It kept you safe. But it's not needed anymore. Your life isn't that place anymore. But your mind still acts like it is. So, it keeps telling you, stay likable. Don't upset them. Don't be too much. And it's exhausting. Let's be clear, this isn't kindness. This is fear. Real kindness feels full. This feels like a cost, a trade. I abandon myself so you don't leave. And eventually, you feel the gap between what you give and what you receive. That gap becomes exhaustion, resentment, emptiness, and still, you keep saying yes, because saying no feels dangerous. But it's not. It just feels like it is. This is where everything shifts. You ask, Or am I just afraid not to? Most people realize they've never been choosing. They've been reacting to invisible threats, old patterns, voices from the past. The threat isn't here anymore, but the response is. And that realization, that's the shift from automatic to aware. Now here's how it starts. Not dramatically, not with a big change, with a pause. Before you say yes, you stop and ask, what do I actually want? And maybe for the first time, you listen. It won't feel comfortable. People will react. Some won't like it. But discomfort is not danger, and the people who leave were never loving you. They were using you. The people who stay, they'll meet you for real. And for the first time, you won't feel invisible because you won't be hiding. You don't need to become selfish. You need to stop abandoning yourself. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to have needs. You're allowed to take up space. That's not selfish. That's human. And when you stop giving from fear, something changes. Your kindness becomes real, not forced, not draining, not a performance, just real. That's who you are, not the version built to survive, the one underneath it. You don't need to perform anymore. You just need to choose, because kindness isn't the problem. Fear is. So the real question is, are you choosing it or are you hiding inside it? Let's talk about what happens after the yes. That internal conversation. You've just agreed to something you didn't want. And then it starts. Why did I say yes? I don't have the energy. They didn't even really ask. And then immediately, you defend it. They needed me. It's not that big a deal. I'd feel guilty if I said no. So you rebuild the yes. You convince yourself it was your choice. And then you feel resentment. That resentment isn't a flaw. It's feedback. It's your real self speaking, saying, that wasn't okay. But you ignore it. Again. And this keeps repeating until something deeper starts to break. Let's talk about that, because this is where it gets serious. The performance doesn't just exhaust you, it slowly erases you. You stop knowing what you like, what you want, what you believe. Everything becomes filtered through. What will they think? And that's not living, that's managing. You're managing perception, managing reactions, managing approval. That's not a personality. That's a survival system. And it's running 24/7. Even when you're alone, you're still adjusting, still explaining yourself, still negotiating with invisible people. That's how deep it goes. Now understand this. Your brain isn't broken. It's outdated. It learned in an environment where approval equals safety, disapproval equals threat. So now it treats small things like danger. A short reply, a delayed text, a shift in tone, and your system reacts instantly. Heart rate changes, thoughts spiral. You overanalyze everything. That's not weakness. That's conditioning. But now it's misfiring because your current life is not your past, but your system hasn't updated. So it keeps running the same script over and over. And the cost? You, your identity, your truth, your voice. So now let's separate something clearly, because this is where people get confused. Kindness versus niceness. Real kindness comes from fullness, has no pressure, doesn't drain you, doesn't expect anything back. Fear-based niceness feels heavy, feels forced, feels like obligation, leaves you empty. From outside, they look identical, but inside, completely different. One is choice, the other is fear, and you feel the difference. That quiet tension, that inner resistance, that subtle, I don't want to do this. You just override it every time, and over time, that gap builds between what you give and what you actually feel. That gap turns into resentment, fatigue, emotional numbness, and sometimes sudden anger, not because you're angry, but because you've been suppressing it for too long. Now here's something uncomfortable. This pattern doesn't just affect you, it affects your relationships. Because when you're not honest, you're not real. And when you're not real, the relationship isn't real. It's built on a version of you, not you. And deep down, you know that. That's why it never fully satisfies, because you're being appreciated for something that isn't entirely true. That creates a different kind of loneliness, one where you're seen but not known. Now comes the shift. At some point, a question appears. Am I choosing this? And for the first time, you don't immediately answer. You sit with it. And slowly, you realize you've been reacting, not choosing. That's the turning point. Not becoming someone new, but becoming aware. And awareness changes everything, because now you can interrupt the pattern. Not perfectly, not immediately, but gradually. It starts small, with hesitation, with noticing, with pausing. And then, sometimes, you say something different, something slightly more honest. That's it. That's the beginning. Now here's the truth most people avoid. When you change, people notice. And not everyone likes it. Some will resist. Some will get uncomfortable because they were used to a version of you that was easier, more predictable, more accommodating. And now, suddenly, you have boundaries. That disrupts things, and your brain will panic. See? This is why we shouldn't change. But remember this, discomfort is not danger. Nothing is collapsing. You're just not performing anymore. And yes, some people will leave. But understand why. They weren't attached to you. They were attached to your role, the helper, the fixer, the one who never says no. And when that changes, they don't know what to do. So they leave. That's not rejection. That's clarity. Because the people who actually care about you, they stay, they adjust, they respect it. And those relationships become real. For the first time, now let's talk about identity, because this is where it feels unstable. If you're not the nice one anymore, then who are you? That question feels uncomfortable, but it's also freedom, because now you get to find out, not based on fear, but based on truth, your real preferences, your real opinions, your real limits. They've been there all along, just hidden. And now, you're letting them come forward, slowly. This process isn't clean. There's confusion, there's doubt, there's even grief. Grief for the time lost, grief for the version of you that had to shrink. Let that exist. It's part of the process. But don't stay there, because there's something on the other side, alignment, where what you feel and what you say Start matching, and that changes everything. You stop feeling divided. You stop overthinking every interaction. You stop carrying that constant tension, and for the first time, you feel stable. Not because everything is perfect, but because you're real. And that's enough. Now let's come back to kindness. You are kind. That's real. But fear distorted it, turned it into something heavy. Now, you get to reclaim it without fear, without performance, just choice. You give because you want to, not because you're afraid. You say no when you mean it, without guilt. You speak honestly, without over-explaining. And something shifts. Your energy comes back. Your relationships deepen. And most importantly, you come back. The version of you that was always there. Not hidden, not edited, just you. And that version? That's enough. So now, everything comes down to one question. Are you choosing your life or reacting to fear? Because that answer changes everything. You've been in the cage long enough. The door isn't locked. It never was. You just thought it was. Now you see it. So what are you going to do?